Hello and welcome to the section on arrays. Let's look at the section objective. After completing this section, you will be able to define and access array. So you'll understand how to define an array and how to access the elements of an array. Then we'll work with a loop called for each loop. For each loop is a special loop that is used to access all the elements of an array. Then we'll work with different types of arrays like empty array, mixed array, indexed and associative array, and multi-dimension arrays. We'll work through each examples with each of these arrays. Then we'll learn about array function unset. This is a very important function. If you're trying to understand arrays, then unset is a very important function. Then you will work with how to sort an array, how to copy an array into another array, and how to split the elements from an array. Then we'll work with exercises, interview question, resources, and obviously the assignments using the arrays. So this section will completely cover only on the arrays, and you'll get a complete understanding of how to work with arrays. Let's understand each of the topic in detail with an example now. Hello and welcome to the lecture on arrays. So if you go to material folder arrays, let's understand how to define and access arrays. So open up the example 1 folder. So you have two files here, logical flow and deliverables. So logical flow, we will learn how to define and use arrays. Part of it, we will define the array. So let's define an array. So save it. So we'll create a folder under www. We'll call it arrays. And we'll save it here. So we'll define an array. So we have a reference file here. If you open up the arrays, go to nodes. There's a reference URL here. I'm going to paste it here for your reference. Let's open up this URL. Okay, so it will go to arrays. This is the manual for arrays in php.net. An array is nothing but an ordered map. A map is basically a collection of value to a keys. Okay, the most important thing I want you to understand is the versioning here. So arrays can be defined with two ways. If you can say array, open parenthesis and close parenthesis, or you can say the square brackets. Okay, these are the two ways you can define an array. Before PHP 5.4, we used to define arrays like this. After PHP 5.4, we use the square brackets. So if you look at the documentation here, as of 5.4, you can also use the short array syntax, which replaces array with the square brackets. So make an habit of using the square brackets instead of defining a method called array and then passing up the value to that array. For all the lecture in arrays, we will try to use the square brackets. Okay, so this is the example I want to show you from the documentation itself. Okay, so let's understand how to define an array. Okay, so we'll define a variable called array. Okay, so define an array is via the square brackets. Okay, and what is inside an array? Array is a collection of values. Okay, so you can have like integers. We can define 1, 2 and 3. Okay, you can have any data type combined together. You can have strings, integers, boolean, decimal points, all combined together in an array. It doesn't matter that you should have only one type of data type. You can have combination of data types. Okay, so now you have defined an array with the square brackets and some values inside it. So there is an easy function to display the array. A function to print an array is called as var dump. Okay, we will see this, how this will print the values. So this is a function predefined. Okay, whenever you want to print an array, you just have to say var dump and dump all the values of an array. You don't have to iterate the array and print it. This function will automatically dump all the values of that array. Okay, so let's hit back to arrays and then we will run our PHP file. So now this array format is actually coming up from var dump. Okay, so var dump will take each of the elements and then try to print it. Okay, let's try to understand what is this var dump is doing. So it's a array of 3. So you have 3 elements, 1 2 3 elements. The 0th element is basically the index of that element. Okay, remember the index means the first element starts with 0, not with 1. Okay, and it's of type integer and the value is 1. It's of type integer, the value is 1. So if you just change 2 to string, then it will say it is a string type, and if you say 3.2, it will say it's a double type, right? So understand how the var dump works. The var dumps show an array of elements. This is 3. The 0th element is integer, the 1th element is string, the 2nd element is double. Okay, and it's showing the values of it. That's how the var dump works. So I'm going to reverse this out. Okay, then let's print it. So it's showing integers, 3 integer values, 1 2 and 3, and the index of that array is 0 1 and 2. Okay, there's another method that's commonly used to print an array, which is actually human readable. It's called as print underscore r for array, and you're gonna pass the array. So there are 2 ways to print an array, using var dump or using printer. We're gonna see the example now. So this is the var dump. It gives you very technical information like how many elements, what is the 0th element, what is the data type, and what is the value of it. But the formatting looks little weird. When you look at the print r, it's basically give you a nice format where it says it's an array, and then 0th element is 1 and 1th element is 2 and 2th element is 3. That's the value of the element, and that is the index of an element. So that's how you basically access an array. Okay, so there are 2 ways to print an array. One is var dump, it shows like this, and one is print r, which shows like this. Okay, whichever way you're comfortable to understand, and depending on situation where you want to understand a data type, then var dump is the right way. If you just want to see the values and the index number, the printer is the best way. Okay, can you do this? Okay, what happens when you just echo out an array? Okay, typically it is an error. Okay, because it's not a variable, it's an array. It's basically an error because it's not showing you the value. So if you're trying to print an array, you should not be doing echo. Okay, so I'm gonna say do not use echo to print arrays. Okay, because it's not gonna print the array, but it's gonna show the data type. Then we'll try to access and print arrays. Okay, so here we have understood the 0th element, 1 and 2. So we're going to use the same syntax and we're going to print it. So instead of using directly array, you can use echo to print that element value. So if you say 0 of array, okay, so what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to access the value of that array. Okay, I'm trying to access with something called as index. Okay, this is 0th index, this is 1 index, this is 2 index, and the value at that index is 1 2 and 3. That's what we have seen here. The value of 0 is 1, the value of 1 is 2, the value of 2 is 3. Okay, let's print this. Okay, you can see 1 2 and 3. Okay, let's comment this out. Okay, you can see the 1 2 and 3. This is basically the value of that array for a specific index. Okay, let's try to change this in a string format and see what happens whether when you try to print like this. Okay, whether the variable substitution happens or not. Okay, imagine you're trying to print an array inside a string. Let's see what happens here. Okay, it will print 1, 2 and 3. So it's possible to use an array inside the string and it's able to recognize that value as well. Okay, so let's try to understand some of the definition of an array. Okay, and how do you spell this out? Means what is the language that you use to define this? So it's a array, you say is an array variable. So you say $arr is basically an array variable. And how do you call array of 0? Okay, we say is a array element. Okay, this is called as an array variable, this is called as an array element. Okay, then what is 0 is called as? 0 is an index of an array. That's how you basically spell this. Okay, $array is an array variable, this is an array element, and 0 is an index of an array. Okay, and remember, array index starts with 0, not 1. Okay, remember, always remember that we have seen here, it always starts with 0, not with 1. Okay, 1 is the value at 0th element. Okay, and remember, array can store any type of value, means it can store strings, integer, double or boolean. Okay, we have seen this case already. Arrays has a length, okay, based on the number of the elements it has. Okay, like string has a length, array also have a length, which is based on the number of, if they have 3 elements, then the length will be 3. So it's number of elements in the array. We're going to see this example now. You can also have array inside an array. Okay, more about this in the next lecture. We're going to see all these things, but understand, array doesn't even hold data types, it can hold arrays as well. Means you can have array inside an array and you can have n number of arrays. Okay, the use case is collection of variables together. Okay, that's the purpose of having an array. You want to have collection of fields together, the variables together. You want to hold like a student array, which holds his ID, name, you know, how much the marks he got, all those details of a student you want to hold in a one variable. Then that is the use case of using an array. That's basically a collection of variables together. Okay, so let's look at an example of how to print an length of an array. Okay, so we can say count, that's a method. Count is a method which is used to print the number of elements in the array. Okay, so let's print this out. The array length is 3. So number of elements is 3 elements. That's what it's trying to say as an length of an array. Next we're going to see how to iterate an array with for each loop. But there's also a way to iterate the array using a for loop. So we're going to see that. Loop 3 an array using for loop. Okay, how we're going to do it? Because we have index as integers 0, 1 and 2, we can actually have a variable running from 0 to 2 and then access that specific element. Okay, we're going to see an example now. So we can say $count is equal to 0 and then $count less than count of $array. Okay, now we're gonna echo $array of count. Okay, I want to show you an example that you can even do with strings. Let's look into this. how it behaves with a string. And you have two variables now. You have count variable and you have array variable. Okay, so let's see whether it is able to print the variable or not. Okay, so you can see 1 1 2 2 and 3 3, so it's able to print this array. And if you look at the value of that array, we are trying to use a variable called count, which is running from 0 to 2, which is 0 1 2, and for each value of that count we are accessing that particular array. Okay, remember your array has to have that index. If that index is not available and you're trying to access, then that's basically an error, right? So you should know when you're accessing an value in an array, that value should be available. Okay, that's basically index has to be available. So let's say there's a case wherein you want to access an array using a constant. Inside the string using constant. Okay, so let's say you have a constant called array element of 1, and then now you are trying to access the array element using this constant. Means you are saying okay, now you want to access an constant. Using a constant you want to access an array element inside the string. Okay, it won't able to print it because it won't understand how to convert that constant into an element, and then how do I access that array. Okay, this is a very valid case. So for that there's a notation of curly braces, and once you use the curly braces you are able to access that value. Okay, so this is the way to access an array using a constant. Let's try to change an array element. Okay, first we will print the array, and we know once we print it, we know it is 0 1 and 2. I can access the array elements and the value is 1 2 and 3. Okay, so I can say array of 0 and I can put any value here. I can say 5 6 and 7, and I can say 1 and 2. Okay, I can print this array again. Okay, now the array has 5 6 and 7 instead of 1 2 3 because we have changed the values. You have changed the value of the same data type. Let's change the same value using a different data type. Is it possible or not? Change the data types as well. Okay, this time we'll use var dump to see the data type as well, because print underscore r doesn't show you the data type, only the var dump shows it. Okay, so for 0th element I'll say this is a string, then I'll say it's a boolean variable true, then I'm going to change to a double. So if you see here, we have completely restructured our array. Okay, we have changed the data types completely. It was all integers, now it's string, boolean, and then double. Okay, let's print this. Okay, previously it was int and integers, now it is string, boolean, and then it is double. So you can actually play around with this completely as you want, but only rules that you have to follow is you need to know what is the index of an array. You should know how to access that element, and once you have the access to that element with a key, that's basically your index number, then you can change to anything you want. You can change the data type, you can change the values as well. Let's define an array with multiple data types. So store any data type in arrays. Okay, and you can see the indentation, of arrays. Okay, just learn this how to indent the arrays. So if I say array 1, okay, remember there's a semicolon in the last. Okay, you can start off with here, and then you can indent it to this line and say string, and then you can say false, and you can say 23.2. okay, remember there is no comma here in the last. Okay, when you end it, you don't have to specify a comma. Even if you specify is okay, but it's not required. Okay, it's also that if you don't specify, you know this is the end, right? And if someone want to add, then they put a comma and add maybe 1, they know this is the last element. So by seeing just the indentation of it, you know there's no comma, so this is the last one. This will help you when you have a complex array structures and you want to have array inside an array. So just to find, if you take one array and just to find which one is the last element of the array, just by looking at the comma here, you will know whether it's the last element or not. Okay, this is how you indent an array. So remember, you have to have an indentation, because once you start working with the arrays using multi-dimension array, the indentation is really helpful. Okay, so we're going to print this array. Okay, so we have integers, we have string, false obviously will not print anything, and then we have an boolean double type. So let's do a var dump. So you have type integer, you have type string, type boolean, and type double, all combined into one array. Let's do a quick summary of what we have seen. So I'll go to the top. So if you go to this URL, you will find, and you can use square brackets to define an array, and then you will put all the elements separated with a comma. There are two methods, var dump and print r. Var dump will show you even the data types. Print r will actually show you the human readable format. How to access and print arrays? You can access it with the square brackets, and you need to have an index. Okay, you can even print it in the double quotes, and you should not do an echo of an array directly. You have to pass the index of that array. And there are a couple of things we learned. Array is an array variable. That's how you call this array. It's an array variable. When you put the array element, then you say is an array element. 0 is the index of an array, and array index start with 0. In an array, you can store any type of data type, string, integer, double, or boolean. And array has a length based on number of elements it has. That's the length of an array. You can also have array inside an array, which we're going to see in the next lectures. The use case of array is basically a collection of variables together of different data types. To print the length of an array, you use count. We have used for loop to access that particular index of an array, and then we have print that variable. Then if you have a constant which you want to use as an array index, then you can use the curly braces to print that value. You can even change the array element with the same data type, or you can choose to have a different data type. And also in the last, we have seen how to indent an array. Okay, so that's all about arrays, how to define and use arrays, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to the lecture on for each loop. So let's understand how to iterate an array using an for each loop. So let's look at the syntax, and we'll try to access some arrays using for each. So if you go to arrays folder, example 2 for each loop, the logical flow is to understand how to iterate an array elements using for each loop. So part of this will create this deliverable file for each loop array, and we'll save it in an arrays folder. Okay, so let's define an array and let's print it. So before that, let me show you the syntax of an for each loop. So this is how the syntax looks like for each loop. So you have to write for each, that's the keyword. Then you have to put an array name here, and as is an keyword again. Then you have to put the any variable name. Okay, so all the array elements will be copied one by one as a loop into this variable, and then with this variable you can access the array. Okay, so let's look at an example to understand this concept. So let's say you have an array, okay, of string values, let's say it is Monday to Sunday, and now you want to write an for each loop to access all the values in that array. Okay, first you can always do a var dump just to see what are the values in that array. Okay, so now let's write a loop. So before that, let's print this. Okay, so we are able to access that array. Let's print it with an for each loop. So syntax is you have to write an for each. Okay, you can say array as $values. Okay, this is a variable. You can put any value name here. This is just a value that you are putting it in the variable. Okay, and this is an array name. This name has to be the name of an array, and this could be any variable that holds that value. Okay, so if you just echo out the values, then you can see the values here. Okay, and if you want to put a counter, okay, just to see what is the index of that counter, so you can say counter plus plus. Now you have an counter which is a running number which starts with 0. Okay, so you can say counter $values. Okay, now you can see the index of that array, but typically index, when there is no index mentioned, we haven't mentioned any index here, automatically it starts with 0 and it will increment as it go along. Okay, that's why we are just using some integer variable and incrementing it by 1 and then using it as an index. So this index is starts with 0 till 6. Okay, if you want to access the array index value, you can even do that. You can still say array counter. Okay, let's print this. So you see I'm able to access even that variable using the counter as well. Okay, array of counter is basically array of that index. I'm trying to print it over here. So we have seen with string variables. Let's try to create an array with different data types and print them. Okay, so for that we can still use the counter. Okay, we can define our array. So we use this, and then we will change some of the strings to different data types. Okay, we'll say true, we'll say 7.5. Okay, we have double, we have integers, we have booleans, and then we have double. Okay, so let's echo this out, and then we'll increment the counter. Okay, it has no problem doing that. It doesn't really care whether you have same data type or different data types. It's able to access that particular value at that index and then try to print it. Okay, so we have 1 here because of true, but it's actually a boolean true. Okay, if you want to print this, we have var dump. So we'll know there are different data types: string, int, string, boolean, string, double, and string. Okay, so for each doesn't really care what data type it is. This value can hold any data type, means it doesn't care what data types you have. You just store that value and you can print that value. This shows how to use for each loop to access the values inside an array, and that value could be of any data type or same data type without an index. You can actually access them using the for each. Okay, so that's all about for each loop, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to the lecture on empty arrays. Go to arrays folder, example 3 empty arrays. Open up the logical flow. We'll understand how to define and work with empty arrays. Okay, part of this will create empty arrays.php file. So let's create this file and understand how to create an empty array. So I'll store in the arrays folder. So how to define an empty array? So remember this, only the square brackets means it's an empty array. Okay, it's like initializing an array with no values, which is an empty value. So how to define an empty arrays? You can say $array is equal to square brackets, nothing inside it. Okay, typically you will put some values, but if you don't put some values, this is called as empty array. The array is initialized and it is empty, right? So if you print the length of the array, okay, PHP, let's run this file. Okay, it's 0. It is initialized with nothing. Okay, it's called as an empty array. Let's do a var dump as well to understand what's inside this array. And also do a printer. Okay, the var dump is 0 elements, right, and nothing inside. The array also is empty. Okay, so this have to understand this, how to define an empty array so that you can add values later in your program. Okay, the way to define empty arrays is just open and close the square brackets. How to check if an array is empty or not? So if you do if empty, so we can say array is empty. There's a method called empty using which you can check whether the array is empty or not. Okay, you can say array is empty. Now can you guess the output of this? Let's do a var dump. Okay, guess the output. What will be the output of an array? Okay, it's saying it is of integer of 10. If you have observed correctly, you have changed the data type. You have changed from an array to an integer. Okay, this is not a way to store a value into an array. Okay, if you once you do just the normal integer operation on the array name, it converts into an integer. So if you want to see this, it was an array, it is converted into an integer. So I can show you that. Okay, previously it was an array, then it becomes an integer. So this is not the right way to store in an array. Okay, remember that. So this basically converted array to integers. Well, how to store this number into an array? Okay, if you want to store that value, you should be passing in the square brackets. You should be doing like this, right? And if you do a var dump, you can guess the output here. You will find that the array is properly stored at index 0, data type of integer, value 10, and the length as 1. Okay, let's take another example. What do you think is an output of this? Okay, here we have said please assign the value 10 to an array. What happens if you are storing the 0th value as an array? Okay, it's interesting to understand that index 0 holds an array. Okay, here we are assigning to that index 0, but here in the 0 itself we are assigning an array, okay, which has 10 as the first value. So you're assigning an array to the 0th value. So let's do a var dump and understand the difference between the two. This is very important to understand when you work with an array. You should know when you just pass a value what happens to the array. If you don't mention the index number and just pass the array, what happens? If you mention the index number and pass the array, you should know what the output will look like. Okay, so let's look at that example. So if you look at that example, previously we say the value 10 is stored at 0th position, right? But here at the 0th position an array is been stored. Okay, an array itself has a 0th position which has one array element of type integer and the value is 10. Okay, so you should be very clear to understand between these two differences. Okay, first difference, you are storing at the 0th value. The second, at 0th value you are storing an array. Okay, so that's why the 0th value is an array here and the 0th value here is the value 10. Okay, there's a lot of difference between the two. If you want to reset the array, you can just simply say like this. This way the array will be reset. Let's do a var dump of an array. Okay, and you can find the array is reset. You can even check the if condition here. Okay, the array is empty. So this is the way to even reset the arrays. Okay, I'll give you a final example to think through what will happen when you type an array inside an array. Okay, if you don't understand this, but high likely you are not really understanding how arrays are working. But if you have understand what is this, what happens within a square brackets, inside a square brackets, then you're actually trying to understand how the array works. Okay, so let's do a var dump and then we'll understand how array works. Okay, so the first array, that is this array, right, is having one element, that is the 0th element, but the array inside that actually doesn't have an element. That's why it is 0 element. Wherever you mention square brackets, immediately it will become an array. If you mention another square brackets inside a square brackets, this becomes an array at 0th element of the parent element. Okay, that's what it's showing here. If the array element of parent have one element and in 0th position it has an array, but that array at 0th element is empty. Okay, it's very important to understand this and you should know how it works. Okay, if you are understanding how this is working, then most likely you are understanding the concept of arrays. Okay, and I always want you to remember this. The square brackets means empty arrays. Okay, well, that's all about empty arrays and I'll see you in the next one. Welcome to the example on mixed arrays. Let's look at an example how to create mixed arrays. Let's look at the logical flow of examples. We'll create an array of elements with different data types. We have seen this as a part of some examples, but we will do a proper definition. We'll understand some of the concepts of mixed arrays. Part of this, we will create the deliverable mixedarrays.php. So let's create this file. So one thing I want to remember this, if index is not specified, if you don't specify an index, then PHP will use the increment of the largest previously used integer key, which means if the last element is 10 and you're trying to insert the 11th one, the index will be 11. Okay, if your previously inserted index is like say 100, if you insert a new key without an index number, it will automatically increment from 101. Okay, so let's look at this example. So this is how you define an empty array. Okay, let's say your array of 0 is 1, and we will also do the mixed arrays. And let's say I'm jumping the index number to string. Okay, I'll jump by 4 and I'll put a boolean variable here. Okay, then I'll jump to 10 and I put 14.5. Okay, now how to add new elements to an array? Adding new values to array, you can simply do it with the square brackets is equal to new string 1, new string 2. And if you remember, here we have mentioned 10, that is the largest number. Then we haven't mentioned any indexes here. We're just saying please add this new array elements. Okay, you can guess the output based on what we have discussed here. If the index is not specified, PHP will use the increment of the largest previously used integer key. So the largest previously used integer key is 10, so this will be 11 and this will be 12. So you can guess the output, and we're gonna do the var dump anyway. Okay, so if you look at 10, it becomes 11 and 12. The strings is automatically added. So the strings is automatically added and 12 is the length of it, and the 12th element is again a string. Okay, so how to add new elements you have learned here. You have to just specify the square brackets and the array name and then the value. Okay, and how the indexes are defined, you can define it once the highest number is 10. The next highest number will be chosen plus 1. So if it is like 100, okay, this, guess what will be here? Okay, it will be 101. So it keep track of the last index number and attach plus 1 to it. And what happens if you make it 0? Okay, make 0th value as a string. Previously this value was previously 1 and now changed value, right, to string. Let's print the array. Now you cannot use for loop because you don't know what is the indexes, because indexes is not like 0 1 2 3 4 5. It is like random integer numbers. So for these cases you have to use for each loop, and you have to just mention what is the array and what is the value. Okay, and then you can print the values. Okay, and it will just print those values. Okay, it converted 1 to string, right? That is this one. It was previously 1. Okay, now it became the string. Well, we have seen 0, 2, 4 and 10. Are you curious to know what is inside array of 1, that as we haven't mentioned it? Okay, so let's print this. Curious right, you can actually do that. Echo array of 1, right? Nothing happens, so you are safe to use that, but there's nothing inside it. It's basically an empty value, right? If you say empty, then it is 1, which is means true. Okay, this array of 1 is empty, that is true. So remember how to add new values to an array. You can just mention the square brackets, assign the value, and it's gonna create a new element in an array. And what index it will take? It will take the index which is increment of the largest previously used integer key number. If it is 100, it will be 101. If the largest highest number is 10, then it will be 11. Okay, so you have learned couple of things. You have learned you can use mixed arrays. You can define n number of arrays. You can choose to have your own index, and you can choose to ignore the index. An index can also be generated by itself. And if you try to print something that doesn't available in the array, it just print some empty values. Okay, and how to check that empty array using an empty method. Okay, so that's all the lecture on mixed arrays, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to the lecture on indexed arrays. So if you go to example 5 folder, indexed arrays, we'll see different types of arrays, and mostly we'll look at first one is indexed arrays. Then we will jump into associative array and multi-dimension array. So we'll start what is called as indexed array. Okay, part of this will create indexed array.php. So let's understand what is indexed array. Index arrays are sequence arrays of element with integer index numbers. Okay, the index is basically represented with a number, integer number. Those are called as indexed arrays. And mostly if you don't mention the index number, it is mostly in sequence. And index starts with 0. New elements, we have seen this, get the index of highest index plus 1 number. You can always break the sequence as well, right? We have also seen this. And add new elements to future index as well. We can jump the index numbers, means you can specify 0 and then directly you can put any index numbers, integer numbers, and store the data there. Okay, it's not necessarily it has to be in sequence. You can choose to have your own index numbers. If you don't mention the index number, the highest index plus 1 number is taken. An index always starts with 0, and mostly if you don't mention anything, it is always in sequence. Okay, this is the characteristic of an indexed array. Whenever someone say create an indexed array has these features. It is denoted with an integer numbers. Okay, a good example is if you have an array, I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? I'm not specifying any index here. These are the values of an array, right? And automatically the index is been set from 0 to 5. Okay, if you do a var dump, you can find the 0th value, 1, 2, 3 and 4 automatically set. This is called as indexed array. Okay, you can jump the index values. You can mention 100, just out of the sequence, and you can store the value there as well. And now you can do a var dump, and it will be perfectly fine accepting that 100 as well. So jump from 4 to 100. So sequence doesn't really matter, but if you don't mention, it will just take up the sequence. Okay, how to add an element to an array? Okay, you do it like that. Just mention the square brackets, don't mention the index number. It will take the index from the previous highest number and it will do the plus 1. So let's look at the string. So let's say I am completely removing all those array and pasting a new one, because I'm not specifying an array. I'm just saying the variable name and assigning a new array altogether. So let's look at what is available in this array now. So we'll do before and after. Okay, it's very important to understand what happens before and after. So before we had an array of numbers, then it changed to array of strings. Okay, the only difference happen is from we are not mentioning the index number. Means we are not saying store it as a sequence, we are saying replace that variable with a new array itself. Okay, it is as similar to resetting an array. This is the way you reset an array. Instead of resetting, we are assigning the new array to it. Okay, and it completely keep lost of what happened previously. It takes up the new array and store it in the array starting with 0. Okay, so the previous array is replaced with the new array, and it will start putting the index as 0. It won't repeat from 101. It won't do like 102. It forgets about this, start fresh from 0. Okay, So this is all about indexed arrays, and I hope you understand how to work with these arrays. So that's all in the lecture for indexed arrays, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to the lecture on associative array. This is the one of the most important topic in array. If you understand associative array, it helps you to make your programming very easier to write. It is very important to understand this associative array concepts in arrays. Okay, so let's look at an example on how to define and use associative array. Okay, if you go to example 6, arrays. Okay, we'll learn how to define and work with associative arrays. Okay, part of this we'll create associative arrays.php. Okay, before we start defining associative arrays, there's something you need to know about associative arrays. In associative array, you specify the index. Okay, you have to specify the index, then only it is called as associative arrays. Okay, and how you do it, you have to mention index and equal to sign, greater than symbol, and then the value. So this is the syntax of how you define an associative array. You have to mention what is the index value and what is the value of that index. Okay, and the short notation is like this: equal to and greater than symbol is basically a special symbol. Okay, it has a special meaning to it of defining a associative array to represent two things. The left hand side is a key and a right hand side is a value. Okay, so what you're actually doing is you're saying key is equal to value. Okay, so when you say index is equal to value, you're saying key is equal to value, so you can access this value via this key. Okay, and key is basically the index and value is the value at that index. Okay, so let's do an example and understand associative arrays. Okay, before that, let's do an example of indexed arrays and then we'll convert into an associative array. So here is an array which is an indexed automatically. It has 0, 1 and all those things automatically created. We are not specifying any index for this. When you do an var dump of this, okay, you can do for each as well. For this, you can say array as values. Okay, so let's print this. Okay, you're able to access the values and the array itself have an index. So this is called as indexed array, where you don't mention the index and index is an integer value and it's automatically been created. Okay, let's define an associative array. Okay, in associative array, the first thing is you have to specify the index. Okay, so let's create an associative array and specify our own index. Okay, I can say 0 of this. Okay, this is a notation where I'm specifying a key and a value. This is an index and this is a value, and the notation for it is you have to specify the key, then this special symbol that is equal to and greater than sign, and then the value. And you are able to print the same thing what we have printed previously. And here the only difference of associative array is that you have mentioned these keys by yourself, and you can do the same thing. You can even use the for each loop to print the values, and it works exactly the same. Let's understand how to iterate the associative array. So if you want to iterate an associative array, okay, you can even get the index value. okay, because index is a custom value. You can put anything here. You can put like Monday. I can put anything I want. When it doesn't have an integer, then I need to have a way to access the keys as well, because it is custom, right? It is user defined. For that, all you have to do is you have to mention the key and then the value. Now key will hold the key and value will hold the value. So you just say key dot the value, okay, and then you just print this and you get the Monday 1 and then rest of the key index. Remember, associative array, for that index need not to be integers, it could be user defined. You can actually mention anything you want. You don't need to have Monday. You can just change the 6 to 6 and then the index can be customized as you want. So this very helpful concept you have to understand in associative array. The index is user defined, okay, it's not automatically created. You can choose to have your own index. How do you access them? You can use the key and the special notation and the value, then you get to access the key and the value of that array. And remember that there are no keywords here, is all custom field names. Means you can say key 1 value 1, key 1 value 1. The only thing that is here constant is the array name, okay, and you can access any field value from that array. Okay, what if you want to print all the keys? You just want to know the keys, right? You can do print r. You have a method called array underscore keys, and then you mention the array. Okay, the array underscore keys will print only the keys. Okay, so if you look at the array, it's just printing all the keys. So Monday 1 2 3 4 5 6 is basically the keys, not the values. It is the key, right? And if you want to access only the keys, okay, you can access keys and value, but you only want to access keys. Okay, so you can say array of keys as keys. You can remove the value and you can print only the keys. Okay, so this is the way to access only the keys. We have seen how to access only the values. We have seen how to access key and a value, and we have seen how to print all the keys. Okay, how to access all the values, we have seen the example here. We can even print it here as well, so you know how to access the values only. So you can see all the values here. So let's take an example, another example of user details. And now you want to fill in the user details. So how the associative array is helpful? Well, associative array, you can put the username, let's say John, and then you can store his email ID, right? You can say john@gmail.com, and you can store all those usernames with their user IDs. Okay, so you can say Jenny, Ajit, and you can remove the comma so we know it's the last element. And now you do a var dump of user details, and you know the key is John and the value is the email ID. Okay, how do you access these values? So if you want to access those values, so we'll use this variable user details, and what you will pass here, you cannot pass 0 or 1 because these are not indexed arrays, these are associative arrays. So you have to pass the key. The key is the username. Okay, so you access them with the key, and the key is the first element, right? This element is the key and this element is the value. So once you access the key, you get the email ID. Okay, so you get their email ID by passing their username. Okay, very helpful concept. And if you want to add a new value to it, right, say I want to add a new key and a value, you can say Mary, and you can say mary@gmail.com. You can do a var dump of user details and you can see whether Mary is visible in that array or not. And you can see the Mary has been added after the Ajit. Okay, and if you want to print the 0th element, right, let's say you want to say what is my 0th element. Okay, so once you do that, the 0th element is actually empty because 0th element does not mean 0 in the array. It is not an indexed array, it is an associative array. There is no value associating with 0 as the key. Means you never mentioned like 0. Okay, if you have done it, then that could have been 0 because we haven't mentioned 0 here. So 0th element does not mean 0th element here. In associative array, you have to mention the key, and the key is not available, it will be empty. Okay, so remember this. I want you to guess this output just to understand whether you're able to get the concept clearly or not. So if I say an empty array, right, and I'm adding one more array to it, what do you think is the output of user details? We have used an empty array here. Okay, so here you have seen the indexed is 0, but you don't want like this. Maybe you want Jane after the Mary. So how you're gonna do it, right? How to add an element at the end of the array? How you're gonna do it? Can you guess how to do it? How to add Jane at the end of the user details? So for it, we have to refresh the user details. So I'm gonna say, okay, let's start fresh, right? And how do I add Jane to here, right? How are we gonna do it? So it's a user details. We have seen this example previously. And then we're gonna add the Jane email ID. Okay, first thing we did is we replaced all these things. We removed everything, added a fresh one. Then we have added a new element to an associative array with a proper key. That's the Jane. And now you can access the user details with the Jane as well. Means you can echo. Now you can echo the Jane and you can get the value of the Jane email ID. Okay, so that's how basically you work with associative array. Let's do a quick summary. In associative array, you specify the index. You have to specify which index it is, and the short notation is index with this special symbol and then value, which is nothing but equal to and greater than, and then the value. The key and the value is being specified in the associative array. So when you don't mention, it becomes an indexed array. It starts with 0. When you mention the associative array, you have to provide this special symbol here. Okay, there are various methods. We have seen various ways to how to access the keys, how to only print the keys, and how to print only the value. Then we have seen how to create an array of user details and what happens if you just keep on adding the new elements, and also at the 0th element. Means if you don't specify the index where it's been stored, and if you want to store it properly aligned with the existing elements, then you have to mention the key and then the value of it. How to access any element in an associative array with the keys. Okay, so that's all about associative arrays. This topic requires an hands-on. If you are not doing an hands-on, I highly recommend you go and do an hands-on to understand this concept very well. Okay, so that's all this lecture on associative arrays, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to the lecture on multi-dimension array. If you go to example 7, open the logical flow file, learn to define and use multi-dimension arrays. Okay, so part of this will create this PHP file. So let's understand what is a multi-dimension array. It's very simple to understand. An array inside an array is called as a multi-dimension array. Means it has array inside an array. I'm gonna see with an example. It's in simple words, it is array holding one or multiple arrays. Okay, so what is a single dimension array? Okay, so if you say array 0 1 2 3, this is a single dimension, means you only have index running from 0 to 1 and each element is just having one value. It's not an array value but a single value. Well, this is indexed array. Okay, similarly you can have single dimension associative array. We have seen this example previously, right? This is a single dimension associative array. Okay, even you have multiple values with key and value, it is still single dimension. Okay, and you can do a var dump of array 1. Okay, you still get one dimension of an array. There is no array inside an array. Okay, so let's define that. So we'll do a multi-dimension with indexed first, then we'll do with association. So we'll say array 2. So this is an array, and inside an array we define 3 arrays. Okay, this is the first array element, this is second, and this is the third. Okay, so here we say 6. So this is a multi-dimension array because there are arrays inside an array. The array actually holding 3 different arrays. Okay, so let's do a var dump, then we'll understand how to access this. Okay, so if you look at this, you have 3 elements, and the first element is array, the second element is array, the third element is array. Okay, the first array have 6 elements, the second array have 3 elements, and the third element is having 2 elements. First array actually have integers and all the values and all the indexes are there for that array. Okay, so let's write a for each loop to access this array. So we say for each array 2 as single array. Okay, now each of this value, right, is equal to this array. So now you can do a var dump of that array, var dump of single array, because every value that you extract is an array. Okay, single array is basically a single dimension array, right, because this becomes a single dimension array, and then you can do a var dump on that array, and if you print it, it's going to print all the values separately, right? If you want to iterate this single array as well, so you can do that. You can continue to say for each single array as values. Okay, so what you're doing here is you are still iterating the second array, this array. Okay, you take the first element, store it in an array. Because the first element is again an array, you're using for each again on that array to print the values. Okay, so now you can echo now you can actually print the array here. And you can specify the comma here. Then you can end the, and you can specify the variable, and let's print the multi-dimension array. So it's gonna print like this, but you're actually iterating all the arrays. Okay, so that's how you basically access a multi-dimension array. Okay, what if a multi-dimension array is with an associative array? So I'm going to copy paste here the multi-dimension array with an associative array, just to save time in not typing this. We'll understand what is this, right? This is an multi-dimension with associative array. Associative because you have this symbol to mention the key. Okay, so this is the first key, this is the second key. The first key holds an array, the second key holds an array. Okay, it's very simple to understand. Okay, it is something like this. Okay, this is the key, first key and second key. Each key has a value and that value is an array. Okay, so it's something like this. You have a key which is pointing to an array. Okay, it is like that. And how do you access this, all the values in an array? It's actually very simple. You can still do for each array3 as you can do value array. You're just getting all the values, not the keys. And now you actually get the values. Each value is nothing but an array, right? So you can say value array as $values, and now you can actually print those values. Right, now you are accessing all the email IDs from this array. Okay, you are not mentioning key here, but you're trying to access all the values, and each value is an array, so you reiterate again on that array. How to access all the key value pair, right? How are you going to do it? So for this you have to understand that key is a string, value is an array, right? The key is a string, the value is an array. So when you iterate, you need to understand you cannot iterate key as an for each. You can do for each only for the value, because value is an array and key is a string. Remember this, key is string and value is arrays. Okay, now let's iterate this. Okay, for each array3, now you can mention key and then you can mention value array. Okay, remember key is a string, so we can say echo values for key. Okay, and then you can iterate the values. Right, then you can say value for key email list 1, email list 2. This is the values for email list 1, and for this key these are the values. Okay, so I hope you have understood how to work and define with multi-dimension array. Multi-dimension array means array inside an array, and that could happen inside an associative array or it could be inside an indexed array. Okay, the single dimension doesn't have array inside an array. is just one value for one given index. An index could be an index of integers, could be a key value of user defined based on associative array notation. Okay, so I hope it's very clear how to work with multi-dimension array. Again, do this exercise. Once you do an hands-on, you will get to understand this concept. Don't just watch the video and then make an assumption to understand this. Make a practice of doing multi-dimension array, because in associative array and multi-dimension array is a most common scenario you will work with PHP. Well, that's the end of this lecture on multi-dimension array, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to array function unset. Go to example 8 and open up the logical flow. Well, what is an unset function? The unset function is to remove or delete an element from array safely. So we'll learn how to remove or delete an element from an array without affecting an array elements. Okay, so part of this will create this file. You will understand the concept. So let's say you have an array of elements. So we'll say you have an indexed array, and let's do a print r of array. Okay, so you have an indexed array. Let's try to remove one of the element from an array. For that, you have an unset method. For unset, you have to pass the array element, right? You have to say array element of 4. Okay, delete this from the array. Okay, so 0 1 2 3 4, 0 1 2 3, the fourth array is been deleted. Okay, you have specified the index number, that's why it's able to delete that specific index from an array. Okay, and if you say array is equal to 5, you're adding a new element to an array. So where does the index starts from? That's the interesting thing to note. Okay, the index will restart from 5. Even though you unset the fourth element, it doesn't start from 4. It doesn't say, okay, it was 3, now it should be 4. It doesn't do that. It already know it's been created by 4. It will still remember. If you still say unset, it will go back to 5 and start from 5. Okay, this is a very important concept to understand how to add and delete values from an array and what will happen to the index numbers. Okay, it's very important. See the index, when you deleted 4, the index started from 5 even though it's deleted. Okay, because once you delete even from the array, it doesn't really remove the index. The index will keep growing from the last integer value even though you delete it. Okay, so let's do an array 1. Let's create another array. First, let's do an associative array 1 comma 3 comma 4. Okay, so let's print this array. Now we have an associative array mixed with an indexed arrays. So this one will be first key and value, then rest of them will be an indexed array, then this will be an associative array. Okay, that's why 0 1 and 2, this we have seen previously. And in this array, let's try to delete something. So unset, so I'll say delete the last. Okay, so let's print this. So has deleted the last with the key, right? And let's add back some integers to it. Let's add back the same value. Okay, let's print that out, and it has no problem deleting and adding, even the sequencing is fine. Okay, and what happens if you add the 6th element to an array? So we'll say 6. And can you guess what is the index number of array 1? It will be 3. Okay, and it has no problem assigning after the last. It still remembers because we deleted, we added, and then we added a new element which is an indexed element to an array. Okay, so you can mix and match with indexed and associative array. And once you unset an associative array, the indexing will not get disturbed. Okay, even though you are adding a last, it's not saying okay this was maybe third and this way before. It doesn't really care about associative array. Whatever the indexing is going on, it just keep continuing with the index. Okay, so it's very important to understand when you have a mixed arrays, okay, and when you are deleting, when you are unsetting, how the indexes will vary. Okay, when it's a number, we saw what's the difference. When it is mixed with associative, it doesn't really care with the index numbers. So index numbers are maintained separately. As you keep adding and deleting associative array, it doesn't affect the index of the array. Okay, so I hope that's very clear on how to unset. You can unset with a specific index, you can unset with an associative array with a key. Okay, both ways it will delete that value from the array. So that's all on the lecture on unset, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to the lecture on sorting an array. So let's understand how to sort an array. Okay, open up the sort array folder, logical flow. So here are the 6 functions to sort an array. We'll sort an indexed array ascending manner and descending manner. Then we'll sort an associative array, again ascending by values, descending by values, then ascending by keys and descending by keys. So we have methods for it, and we'll try to use and sort an both type of array, indexed array and associative array. Okay, part of it will create sort array.php. So let's look at this example. So there are 2 methods, sort and rsort. Okay, we're going to use these 2 methods to sort an array. So let's define an indexed array. If you look at the array, it's not ordered. So let's apply some sort on it. So before that, we print the array. And we're going to say sort, right? Then let's print it back and see what happens to the after sorting. Then we can do an rsort. Then we print back the array. Okay, so let's look at this example. Okay, first it was not sorted, second it was ascending order, then it was descending order. So rsort is descending, normal sort is ascending order. Okay, it's very simple and straightforward. For associative array, you have a sort and ar sort. This is only for associative array. So let's define an array. So we say 3 first, then 1. Remember, there is a key and a value, so you can sort based on key, ascending, descending. You can sort on value, ascending and descending. Okay, so let's print the array first. Okay, you can say a sort on the array 1. Let's print the array after sorting. Okay, this is before and this is after, and if you look at it, is Ajit, John and Roger. Okay, let's do an r sort, ar sort, the descending order. So you have Roger, John and Ajit. Okay, this way we're working on the values, and there's something called as k sort and k r sort. Okay, obviously the k indicates the key, and it's easy to understand it is working on the keys. and if you print this out, this is the k sort and kr sort. Okay, the first one is 1 to 3, 3 to 1. It's sorted on the keys. So there are the 6 functions, k sort and kr sort. The k sort will sort ascending order on the keys. Kr sort will sort the descending on the keys. A sort, AR sort will sort based on ascending and descending on the values, and just the sort and R sort will sort the indexed arrays. Okay, so that's all on the lecture on sorting, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to the lecture on copy array. Let's see how to copy arrays. Okay, go to example 10. The logical flow is understand how to copy arrays from one array variable to another one. Okay, so part of this will create copy array.php. So let's do some samples here. So sample 1, let's say you have an array, indexed array. Now you want to copy this to another array. Okay, you can just simple say array. Okay, and this array will be copied into this array, and then you can do a var dump of this array. Okay, you are printing the new array, array 1, and array 1 is able to print the arrays perfectly. So it's basically very simple. You just assign the values and the arrays will be copied over to the new array. Okay, let's do a sample 2. You can even do for each loop. You can say array as $values, and you can say array 2, don't mention any index, and just copy over the values. Okay, then you can do a var dump of array 2. Okay, even this, copy the array. Perfect. Well, this is another way how to copy the values from one array to another array. Let's look at sample 3. You have another array. This time we will define associative array. You can even copy over the associative array just with an equal to sign, and it is able to copy that array to the array 4. Okay, so this is the value of an array 4, and it's able to copy over the arrays. Similarly, you can write a for loop, that is sample 4, to copy over the array. So let's say you have an array 5 and you want to copy from array 4. So you can say array 4 as $key $value. Okay, then you can say array 5 $key $value. Then you can print the array 5. This $array 5, and it's able to copy over all the keys and the values from an associative array into a new array. Okay, so these are the 4 examples how to copy an indexed array and an associative array. Well, that's all on the lecture on how to copy arrays, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to the example on split array. Let's understand how to split an array. Okay, for this go to example 11. We'll understand how to split strings to an array. Okay, so part of this will create a string array.php. Okay, so let's say you have to convert string to an array. Okay, you have a string you want to convert into an array. Okay, so let's say you have students, and maybe you're reading from a CSV file, or you already have a string which is in CSV format with comma delimiter. Okay, Parker, Ahmed, Jacob, Jim, right? And you want to store them in an array now. Okay, so for this you have a method called explode. You have to mention what is the delimiter, you separate it by comma, and what is the variable name. Okay, so that's your string variable. Okay, so let's print this array now. So let's run this program. Okay, so now you're printing student array and you have split by comma, so that's why it's able to print all the elements into a nice array format. Okay, let's do a reverse way, array to string. Let's say you have an array you want to convert into a string. Okay, so let's say you have a student list. Okay, you can say implode. Okay, implode is to convert from an array to string, and you can say I am separating with a comma, and all the array elements separate with a comma. Okay, that's what you're saying, and then you have to pass in the array, and you can just echo out the string now. Okay, so you are able to convert a string into an array and array back to a string. So the methods is explode, to explode and string into an array. Implode is to convert an array into a string. Okay, next let's look at, you want to do a limited number of array elements. Means you want to specify how many array elements you want to explode. Okay, the same example, but you say okay, I only want the 3 elements, right? You can do that, and only 3 elements will get exploded. Means it is stored in that array. Okay, so that's basically 0, 1, 2. That's basically 3 elements. Okay, and if you see the third element, it doesn't explode after the third element. Whatever is left over, just copy it over to that array. Okay, so that's the example on how to split an array from string to array and array to string and string to array. So one method is explode, one method is implode. For explode also you can specify how many number of elements you want to explode. Okay, so that's all in the lecture on how to split array, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to the exercise section on arrays. So let's do our first exercise. The first exercise is to define and read 2 types of arrays. Okay, what are the 2 types of array? Indexed array and associative array. So if you open up the logical flow, you have to define an indexed array and an associative array. Use employee details as an array. So employee typically have name and job, so you can use any details like employee ID, employee email ID, phone number. You can just simply go with employee ID, his name and his job, and you can define an associative array out of it. Then you can display them using the for each loop. Okay, so that's basically your exercise. You can use this file name array exercise1.php, and then you can do this exercise. So you can pause the video here and start doing the exercise now. So let's do this exercise. So for this we'll create this file. Let's define an indexed array and just specify the employee IDs. And I'll use for each loop to display them. Okay, so I'm using indexed ID and I'm able to print some of the values using for each loop. Let's define an associative array. So here is my associative array, and I have employee ID as a key, then an array as a value, and each array has name and its job. Okay, and which is again an associative array. So it's an associative array inside an associative array. Okay, just to make things complex and easy to understand the concept better. Okay, so how do you iterate the associative array inside an associative array? So let's look at that. So I'll say employee details as key and value. So this is an associative array. Then for each value as emp1. Okay, so let's print this. Okay, so I'm able to access all the values from an associative arrays as well using the for each loop. Well, that's the exercise. So we are able to define an indexed array, print it via the for each loop. We're able to define the associative array, and even we use for each loop to print it. Okay, that's your exercise, and I hope you have done this exercise. Well, that's on the lecture on exercise 1. I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to the lecture on exercise 2. The exercise 2 is about reading a multi-dimension array. So open up this exercise 2 folder, the logical flow. You have to write a for each loop to read this array. Okay, this is a multi-dimension array. So do this exercise, copy this over to your program and try to read all the values from this array. Okay, try to write and for each loop to access this multi-dimension array. That's your exercise. Well, all the best. Pause the video and do this exercise now. Let's do this exercise. For this, we create a deliverable file, array exercise 2. Okay, the first thing is we'll copy over that array, multi-dimension array. We'll say planets is equal to that value. So your exercise is to print this, right? So let's do a for each loop. So I'll say planets as $key to planet. I'll write another for each loop to access the planet as planet name, planet details. Then I'll use for each loop planet details as planet p. Okay, now just I have to echo the p, then I should be able to access all the elements of the planets. So I'll say PHP array exercise 2. Okay, so I'm able to access the element like hot, cold, normal, white, red and blue, right? I'm able to access all the elements of an array, and that's how you basically have to dig down into each of the array to access that specific array. Okay, so I believe you have done this exercise and you are able to iterate and access all the elements of an array, and you're able to print them on the console. Okay, so that's all on the exercise 2 on how to print an multi-dimension array, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to the practical test. If you can open up the folder, practical test folder, open up the logical flow of examples. So here is your exercise. You have to create a student array with 3 student details. Okay, student 1, 2, 3. Provide the details like ID, name, age and class. Then fill up the array and display in an HTML page. And you can use the table structure to display the student details. So the assignment is basically very simple. You have to create an student array and display that array as a table on the HTML page. So once you define, make sure you define with ID, name, age and class, and filled up with 3 student details. So when you print on the table, you should see all those details for 3 students. Well, that's your assignment. We'll do this exercise, and I hope you will try to understand how to work with indexed arrays, associative arrays, multi-dimension arrays, and how to work with for each loop. Okay, so all the best for the assignment, and I'll see you in the next one. Welcome to the summary section. Let's do a quick summary on what you have learned in arrays section. So by now you should be able to define and access arrays. You should able to iterate all the elements of an array using a for each loop. Then you should able to create different type of arrays like MD, mixed, indexed, associative and multi-dimension arrays. You should know how to use a function called unset within arrays. You should able to sort, copy and split arrays, and I believe you have worked through exercises, interview question, resources and assignments using arrays. Well, that's all about arrays, and I'll see you in the next one.